The planning dinner was at Luminaire, the restaurant where Caroline wanted her rehearsal. Truffle oil and quiet money, that's what the air smelled like. White tablecloths so crisp they could cut skin. Diane still works at that nonprofit, Caroline said, holding up the seating chart like evidence in court. It's embarrassing. We can't have her at the head table looking like that. Mom's pen was already moving across my name. Clean, decisive strokes. The kind you use when erasing a mistake. She makes what, 40,000? My brother Marcus added. Jessica's friends are all executives. Doctors. What's Diane going to talk about? Homeless people. Dad sipped his wine. Said nothing. That silence was its own verdict. I'd worked in event coordination for 12 years before starting my nonprofit. I knew exactly how Luminaire operated. I knew because I'd consulted for their ownership group in 2019, restructuring their vendor contracts, saving them $340,000 annually. The owner, Richard Chin, sent me a bottle of 1990 Chateau Margaux as thanks. I also knew that Caroline's deposit, $15,000 for the venue, plus another $8,000 for the rehearsal dinner, had been paid by a corporate card registered to DRP Event Solutions. My company. My card. Caroline had asked to use my connections 8 months ago. Could I help with vendor discounts? Maybe leverage my nonprofit relationships? I'd smiled, agreed, and quietly paid for everything while she bragged to the family about her fiancé's generosity. I pulled out my phone under the table. Typed one email to my operations director, Kira. Cancel Parker Reynolds' wedding. All contracts. Immediate. Caroline's phone rang during dessert. She glanced at the screen, Luminaire's venue manager, and sent it to voicemail, annoyed at the interruption. It rang again 30 seconds later. Excuse me, she said, stepping away from the table with practiced grace. The kind of grace that comes from never being told no. We could hear her voice from the hallway. Professional at first. Then confused. Then shrill. He came back to the table pale. Actually pale, not the controlled blush she usually performed. The venue manager says our deposit was refunded, Caroline said slowly, like the words didn't make sense in that order. They're saying the account holder requested cancellation. But that's impossible. Jason paid. I paid, I said. The table went silent. What? Mom's voice was sharp. The deposit. The rehearsal dinner contract. The floral retainer at Botanica Gardens. The photography advance with Chin Studios. The cake deposit at Sucre. I paid for all of it. 8 months ago. You asked me to help with my connections. Marcus laughed. Actually laughed. Diane, this isn't funny. DRP Event Solutions, I continued. My consulting company. The one I started after leaving event coordination. We do corporate event planning, vendor negotiations, and contract management for high-net-worth clients. Last year's revenue was $2.4 million. This year we're projected at $3.1 million. I opened my phone, pulled up the payment portal, turned the screen toward Caroline. Transaction history. $15,000 to Luminaire. $8,000 to Luminaire Catering. $4,500 to Botanica Gardens. $6,000 to Chin Studios. $2,800 to Sucre Patisserie. All paid from my corporate account. All refunded 2 hours ago. Caroline's hands were shaking. You can't. This is my wedding. I can. I did. Every contract lists DRP Event Solutions as the primary account holder. You're listed as the event contact. When the primary account holder requests cancellation and refund, venues comply. It's standard. Dad finally spoke. Diane, this is unreasonable. What's unreasonable? I said, voice level, is being told I'm too embarrassing to sit with my own family. What's unreasonable is my mother crossing my name off a seating chart like I'm a typo. I stood up. Left $200 bills on the table for my untouched meal. You wanted successful family only at that head table, I said. I've removed myself. And my $36,300 in deposits. I walked out of Luminaire into the November cold. Sharp and biting. The kind that makes you feel clean. The ghost ledger. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I opened a new spreadsheet. Title: The Cost of Being Invisible. Line item 1. Caroline's college graduation. I flew from Seattle to Boston. Took 2 days off work. Bought the Kate Spade bag she wanted, $3.40. At dinner, Dad toasted her accomplishments for 8 minutes. When it was my turn, Mom cut me off after 40 seconds. We need to order. Cost, self-worth. Memory of being celebrated. Never recoverable. Line item 2. Marcus's promotion party. I coordinated the entire event at his request. Booked the venue using my vendor relationships. Saved him $4,000. During speeches, his boss asked who planned it. Marcus said, a professional coordinator. Very expensive. I was standing 10 feet away. Cost, professional acknowledgement. The phrase, my sister did this. Never refunded. Line item 3. Mom's 60th birthday. I spent 3 months planning the surprise party. Guest list of 50. Caroline arrived late, brought store-bought wine. Mom's thank you speech. Caroline, you always know exactly what I need. Cost, recognition. The sentence, Diane organized this. Never spoken. Line item 4. Family Christmas every year. I give thoughtful gifts, researched and personal. Last year I gave Dad a first edition of his favorite Steinbeck novel. $2.80. He opened it, said, nice, moved on. Caroline gives gift cards. Gets hugged for being practical. Cost, belief that effort matters. Erosion happens slowly then suddenly. Line item 5. The nonprofit years. 8 years running homeless services. Started with $12,000 in savings. Now serving 340 people annually. 89% program efficiency. Featured in Seattle Times. Mom's response when I sent the article, that's nice, honey. Caroline got promoted to VP. Cost, family pride. The words, we're proud of you. Never issued. Line item 6. Every phone call. I call weekly. Tell them about grant wins, new housing contracts, people we've helped. Response, polite. Brief. Then, did you hear Caroline bought a Tesla? Cost, enthusiasm. The feeling someone cares about your victories. Depleted. Line item 7. This planning dinner. I pay for their wedding. Leverage 12 years of industry relationships. Save them tens of thousands. Get uninvited from the head table for being unsuccessful. Cost, dignity. The belief family means something. Balance now 0. Total cost. 1 relationship, unsalvageable. I saved the spreadsheet. Sent it to no one. Some ledgers exist just so you know the math is real. Internal reflection. The slot machine theory. There's a concept in psychology called the gambler's fallacy. You keep feeding the slot machine because you're convinced the jackpot is coming. 1 more quarter. 1 more kind gesture. 1 more attempt to prove your worth. The fallacy isn't that you're playing. It's that you think the machine has memory. That it's tracking your investment and will eventually pay out because you've earned it. Family worked like that for me. I kept depositing love, effort, professional success, thinking eventually the display would light up. Congratulations, you matter. But slot machines don't have memory. They're programmed for randomness and profit. And some families operate the same way. I think I knew this at Caroline's college graduation. That moment when Mom cut me off mid-sentence to order appetizers. Something small died then. Something that whispers, they'll see you eventually. Just keep trying. But I kept feeding the machine. There was a specific moment. A sensory memory I can't shake. Marcus's promotion party. I was standing near the bar watching him accept congratulations for an event I'd designed. The bartender asked if I wanted another drink. I said no. The background noise went blurry. Laughter, clinking glasses, classic jazz. And for 5 seconds I felt completely invisible. Not ignored. Invisible. Like I could walk out and the party would continue, perfect and complete, never noticing the absence. That's when I started my consulting company. Not as revenge. As proof of concept. Could I exist successfully outside their validation? Could I build something real that didn't require their applause to be legitimate? 3 years later, $2.4 million in revenue. Clients in 6 states. A team of 8. Industry awards. Media features. The slot machine never paid out. But I stopped playing. Procedural justice. How systems protect themselves. The morning after the planning dinner, my phone rang at 7 a.m. Richard Chin, owner of Luminaire. Diane, I got a call from a very upset bride. Caroline Parker. She's saying there's been a mistake with her deposit. No mistake, I said. I'm the account holder. I requested cancellation and refund. All contracts list DRP Event Solutions as primary. She's threatening legal action. She can try. The contracts are clear. Primary account holder has full cancellation rights within the refund window. We're 43 days out from the event. Your policy allows refunds up to 30 days prior with 25% retention. I'm within terms. Silence on the line. Then, you paid for your sister's wedding and she uninvited you. From the head table. For being unsuccessful. Richard laughed. It was brief but genuine. I'll handle her attorney if she calls. Your contract law is solid. And Diane? That restructuring you did for us in 2019? We're still using your vendor framework. You saved us another $90,000 last quarter. Thank you, Richard. Thank you. And I'm sorry your family is stupid. Caroline hired an attorney. James Morrison from Barrett & Klein. He sent a demand letter to DRP Event Solutions within 48 hours. My attorney, Patricia Zhao, responded same day. DRP Event Solutions was the primary account holder on all contracts related to the Parker Reynolds wedding. Ms. Diane Parker, as CEO of DRP Event Solutions, executed standard cancellation procedures within contractual terms. All deposits have been refunded per vendor policies. Ms. Caroline Parker was listed only as event contact, not account holder. She has no legal standing to challenge cancellations executed by the primary account holder. Marcus called me directly. Furious. You're destroying Caroline's wedding over a seating chart? That's insane. I'm not destroying anything. I've simply withdrawn my financial support. She's free to rebook everything. At full price. With a new deposit. We don't have $36,000 sitting around. Then maybe she shouldn't have uninvited the person who was paying for it. He hung up. Mom called next. Her voice had that controlled disappointment she'd perfected. The one that made you feel 6 years old and guilty for existing. Dan, this is cruel. You're punishing your sister on what should be the happiest day of her life. She punished me, I said simply. At a planning dinner for a wedding I was funding. He called me embarrassing. You crossed my name off the seating chart. Those were choices. You're being dramatic. I'm being factual. The contracts list my company as the account holder. I exercised standard cancellation rights. If she wants to get married at Luminaire, she can pay the deposits herself. We thought Jason had paid. He thought wrong. For 8 months, I've been quietly covering costs while she bragged about her fiancé's generosity. I helped because I'm family. Then I got uninvited from the head table for being unsuccessful. So I stopped helping. Your father thinks you're being spiteful. Tell Dad that spite would be showing up at the wedding and making a scene. What I did was business. Clean, documented, legal. The family business he's so proud of should appreciate that. I hung up before she could respond. Consequence cascade. The consequences arrived like dominoes. Slow at first, then accelerating. Week 1. Caroline tried to rebook Luminaire. The venue was now $22,000 for her date. Spring wedding season, high demand. She didn't have it. She tried Botanica Gardens. They were booked until October. Chin Studios? Booked. Sucre Patisserie? 6-month waitlist. Every vendor I'd secured with my industry relationships, now unavailable. Week 2. Caroline's story spread through the extended family. Aunt Ruth called me, voice stiff. I heard what you did. That was extreme. I withdrew financial support after being told I was too embarrassing to sit with successful family. Still, it's her wedding. It's my money. Aunt Ruth didn't call back. 3 cousins sided with Caroline. 2 sided with me. The rest stayed silent. The kind of silence that chooses sides through inaction. Week 3. Jason's parents got involved. They offered to cover some costs. Found a different venue, the Berkshire Hotel. Less prestigious. Available because someone else had canceled. Caroline cried on the phone to Mom. I know because Mom called me, voice breaking. She's devastated. This isn't the wedding she wanted. Then she shouldn't have made it contingent on erasing me. Week 4. The wedding got rescheduled. Smaller. The Berkshire Hotel, 120 guests instead of 180. Local photographer instead of Chin Studios. Grocery store cake instead of Sucre. I received no invitation. Not even to the ceremony. I didn't expect one. 6 months later, I got a message from my event coordinator, Kira. Luminaire wants to profile you for their Vendor Excellence series. They want to feature the work you did restructuring their operations. Richard specifically requested you. I did the interview. It published in Event Professional magazine 3 weeks later. 2-page spread. Photo of me at Luminaire, in the private dining room Caroline had wanted for her rehearsal dinner. The headline, How Diane Parker Built a $3.1 million Event Consulting Empire by Mastering the Details That Matter. Caroline saw it. I know because Marcus texted me. Really? You had to do the interview at Luminaire? I didn't respond. The ending, 2 years later. DRP Event Solutions now operates in 4 cities. Revenue last year, $4.2 million. We've expanded into corporate retreat planning and nonprofit fundraising galas. I'm planning a gala for my homeless services nonprofit next month. Luminaire is hosting. 300 guests. Expected fundraising, $180,000. Richard Chin is donating the venue cost. He told me, what you did that night, walking away from people who didn't value you, that took guts. I respect that. Caroline got married at the Berkshire Hotel. I saw photos on social media. Looked fine. Perfectly fine. The kind of fine that comes from compromise and reduced expectations. I don't speak to my parents anymore. Or Marcus. Or Caroline. The last contact was 18 months ago. Mom sent a text. Can we talk about reconciliation? I responded, I'm open to that conversation when you can articulate specifically what you're apologizing for. She never replied. Sometimes I think about that planning dinner. The smell of truffle oil. Mom's pen crossing out my name. The decisive cruelty of it. And I think, she wanted successful family only at that head table. She got exactly what she asked for. I just wasn't sitting at it.
The clatter of silverware echoed too sharply against the old dining room walls. We were gathered for supper on Munjoy Hill, the smell of baked haddock still lingering when my mother drove her fork into the table as if she were staking a claim. Her voice followed, sharp and unshakable. You have 24 hours to get your things out. This house is your brother's now. The words didn't sound real at first. I searched my father's face, hoping for contradiction, but he never lifted his eyes from his plate. My brother Rogan leaned back in his chair, arms folded, a smug line tugging at his mouth. I felt the weight of silence pressing down harder than any storm off Casco Bay. I looked around the room I had poured years into fresh paint on the trim, windows I'd had replaced after the last nor'easter, the sturdy floorboards I refinished with my own hands. None of it mattered now. In one sentence, I was erased. My chest tightened, but I refused to give them the argument they were prepared for. I set my napkin on the table and pushed back my chair without a word. My mother's eyes narrowed, waiting for me to explode, but I would not give her the performance she expected. My father sipped his water like a man who had already chosen a side. Rogan smirked as if victory were already his. The house that had been my safe harbor was slipping from me, yet I kept my voice still and my steps steady. On the porch, the wind off the bay cut against my skin, but clarity came with it. They thought silence meant surrender. They thought 24 hours was all I had. It would be enough. The house lay quiet after the argument, every corner humming with memory. I walked slowly from room to room, my footsteps soft against the boards I had sanded myself. In the kitchen, the cabinets still carried the faint scent of varnish I'd brushed on during the late nights after work. When I stayed up to finish projects no one else cared to touch. My hands had scrubbed the stains out of this space. My paychecks had bought the new appliances, yet now it was claimed as someone else's gift. I drifted into the living room, letting my fingers graze the warm beige walls I had painted only 2 summers ago. I remembered standing on a ladder, roller in hand, determined to brighten the place after years of gray. Rogan had been gone then, off chasing contracts in other states, too busy to return calls. My parents had murmured appreciation at the time, but it hadn't lasted. Tonight, those walls stood mute, their glow dimmed by betrayal. Upstairs. I paused outside the small bedroom I had made my own. The storm of 5 years earlier came rushing back, wind tearing shingles from the roof, rain driving through leaks in the attic. My father had thrown up his hands, said there was nothing to be done without money. I had written the checks to the contractor, drained what savings I had, and signed for overtime at my firm to cover the rest. The repairs had held, proof that I could keep us safe even when the world outside raged. Near the stairwell, I touched the railing, still smooth where I had sanded splinters away. My grandfather Silas had stood here once, his voice rough but kind as he told me, "These boards will need your hands someday." At the time, I thought he meant simple chores, but now his words felt heavier, as if he had seen this night coming. I stopped at the front door, the air cooler there, salt from the harbor seeping in through old seams. The house seemed to breathe with me, holding the weight of all I had poured into it. Tomorrow I would need answers, and I already knew who to call. I barely slept, the house pressing in on me with a silence that no longer felt safe. At dawn, I wrapped a coat around my shoulders and stepped onto the porch, staring toward the eastern promenade where the bay was just beginning to glow with pale light. My phone felt heavy in my hand as I scrolled to Sloane Merrick's number. We had met years ago at Bowdoin, both of us restless to prove ourselves. She'd gone into law, sharp-minded and uncompromising, and I had always trusted her judgment. When she answered, her voice carried the same no-nonsense edge I remembered. I told her everything: the dinner, my mother's decree, my father's silence, Rogan's smug grin. She listened without interrupting, only the faint scratch of her pen coming through the line. When I finally stopped, she exhaled slowly. "Maris, first thing, you are not being legally evicted. A parent shouting at dinner is not a notice. Maine law requires due process. They can't just push you out overnight." Her certainty steadied me. Still, the sting of betrayal clung to my skin. "They gave me 24 hours, I said. "They mean to hand it all to Rogan. Then we start with proof." She replied, "Receipts, mortgage records, any emails or contracts from when you covered their debts. And one more thing, probate files. Do you know if your grandfather left a will?" The question jolted me. I remembered Silas's rough voice, his hand on the railing, telling me the house would always need me. He owned it until he passed. I whispered, "But I assumed it went straight to them." "Never assume," Sloane said firmly. "If a will exists and it names you, your parents may not have had the authority to gift the house at all. I'll have someone search the probate court today." I leaned against the porch column, the cold seeping through my coat, but a flicker of warmth building in my chest. For the first time since last night, I felt less like a trespasser in my own life. "I'll gather everything," I said. "Good. The tide's already shifting. Don't waste energy on arguments. Find the rocks and stand on them." Her words stayed with me as I went back inside, already pulling open drawers for folders of bank statements and receipts. By mid-afternoon, Sloane called, her voice tight with urgency. "Maris, I found something." I pressed the phone hard against my ear as she explained. She'd had a clerk at the Cumberland County Probate Court pull every file tied to Silas Alden's estate. Among them lay a notarized will, dated 3 years before his death. It was simple, direct. With his broad signature stamped beneath the seal, the house on Munjoy Hill was left solely to me. My knees buckled, and I sank into the armchair I had bought with my first real paycheck. For a moment, the room tilted. I thought of evenings with my grandfather on the porch, his hand steady on mine as he pointed out ships crawling across Casco Bay. He had known. Somehow, he had looked past everyone else and trusted me to keep the house alive. Why didn't they tell me? My voice cracked. Because it didn't suit them. Sloane answered. "The will was filed. Your parents had access to it, and they chose to act like it didn't exist. They couldn't stomach the truth that Silas passed over them, and over Rogan." A hot flush rose in my chest. I pictured my mother's narrowed eyes at dinner, my father's refusal to look at me, Rogan's smirk. The betrayal wasn't just in their words last night. It had been years in the making. They had buried my grandfather's decision to prop up Rogan, to protect his pride and give him a stage he hadn't earned. Sloane's tone sharpened. "We can enforce this. I'll prepare a petition, but you need to stay calm. Gather receipts. Document your contributions. Keep everything organized. They'll fight. But the signature on this paper is stronger than their performance." I stared at the copy Sloane emailed moments later, the black ink stark on my phone screen. His handwriting the same loops I remembered on old letters named me as heir. They had hidden it, hoping silence would erase me. But the silence was ending. I stood, the decision settling into my bones like stone. If they wanted me out in 24 hours, then in 24 hours they would learn whose house this truly was. The next morning I moved quickly, determined to act before my parents returned or Rogan arrived with his suitcase. I called a local company, Portland Harbor Movers, and explained what I needed: a rush job, only a few large items, nothing more. The man on the line hesitated at the short notice, but by noon he promised to send a crew. While I waited, I walked through the house with a stack of sticky notes and a pen. I marked only what I had bought: the slate gray sofa I'd saved for months to purchase, the stainless steel washer I installed in the basement, the curtains I had chosen to match the beige walls. Each tag was both a memory and a receipt, proof of my labor when no one else would lift a hand. In the dining room, I paused at the oak table my grandfather had built decades earlier. The chairs around it were mine new, sturdy, bought after my mother complained about the wobbly ones. I marked them, but I left the table untouched. The cedar chest in the hall, filled with old quilts, I left as well. I wanted no accusations of theft. I wanted the truth clean. Through the window, I saw Mrs. Penfield from across the street watching. A few minutes later, she knocked softly and stepped inside, her eyes kind but searching. "You've always been good to this place," she said. "I've seen you paint, mend, haul things in storms. It's yours as much as his ever was." Her words steadied me more than she knew. Soon after, Tom Keegan stopped on his walk from the docks, dust still on his boots. He glanced at the porch beams I had reinforced years back. "Your grandfather would be proud," he muttered. By the time the movers arrived with their white truck, the rooms were mapped out in small squares of colored paper. I didn't take everything. I took only what was mine. And when Rogan walked through the door, that difference would matter more than he ever expected. The movers had just finished hauling the sofa into the truck when I heard the grind of tires on the driveway. Rogan stepped out of a rented sedan, a sleek black suitcase trailing behind him. He looked at the house as if it were already his stage, chin lifted, shoulders squared. He brushed past me at the door without a greeting. His shoes echoed on the bare floorboards, the emptiness of the room greeting him louder than words. He stopped short where the sofa had stood, turning slowly in a circle. "What the hell happened? I took what belonged to me," I said evenly. He swung around, eyes narrowing. "This is sabotage. Mom and Dad gave me this house, and you gutted it before I even had a chance to move in." I crossed my arms, refusing to meet his fire with my own. The washer, the chairs, the sofa, I paid for them. I have every receipt. Furnish it yourself if you want to call it home. His face flushed, but the anger broke with something else fear. He sank onto his suitcase, rubbing his temples. "You don't understand. My contracting business is falling apart. Investors are circling, and I promised them I'd have collateral." And his voice dropped. "Lila's pregnant. I need this house. It's not just for me." The words struck me harder than I expected. For a heartbeat, I saw the brother I had grown up with, knees scraped, chasing kites with me on the Eastern prom. But that boy was gone. Now he wanted my silence and my sacrifice to patch his mistakes. "I'm not your collateral," I said softly. "And our grandfather didn't choose you for this house. He chose me. You may not like it, but that's the truth." Rogan's jaw clenched, his desperation boiling into rage again. "You'll regret this. They'll make sure of it." I stood my ground. the sound of the movers shutting the truck doors punctuating the air. Rogan glared at the emptiness one more time. But what he saw missing was not furniture. It was his entitlement slipping out the door with them. 2 mornings later, I stood with Sloan inside the Cumberland County Probate Court, the copy of my grandfather's will clutched like a lifeline. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and polish, and my parents sat across the aisle, rigid as statues. Rogan shifted in his seat, restless, the skin around his eyes tight with sleeplessness. Sloan rose first. Her voice was steady as she outlined the chain of events Silas Alden's notarized will, the mortgage payments I had made, the receipts for repairs, the affidavits from neighbors who had witnessed my care for the house. She moved like she had rehearsed this for years. My mother's rebuttal came sharp and rehearsed. Silas always meant for the house to stay with the family. We assumed it was a matter of intent, not paperwork. My father nodded along, his eyes avoiding mine. They spoke of Rogan's needs, his future child, his role as the eldest. The judge interrupted, raising a hand. Intent is not stronger than a signed and notarized document. This will is clear. The property belongs to Maris Alden. Until full probate enforcement is complete, no transfer or occupancy may occur. The restraining order stands. The gavel struck, and the sound rang like thunder. My parents flinched. Rogan's face hardened, and for the first time since the dinner on Munjoy Hill, I felt the ground hold steady beneath me. Afterward, I returned to the house. The movers had left it half empty, yet the silence no longer felt like loss. I walked into the kitchen, opened the drawer where loose keys rattled, and selected the old brass one Silas had kept on a leather string. I placed it on the counter, not as an offering, but as a marker. This key was no one's bargaining chip. It was the proof of what had already been decided, years before I ever thought I would need it. When I locked the door behind me, I knew the battle was not finished, but the story they had written about me was already breaking apart. The official deed came in the mail a week later, my name written where my parents had tried to erase it. I sat at the small desk in my apartment and traced the letters with my finger, not with triumph, but with an unfamiliar stillness. The court had sided with me. The law had affirmed what Silas left behind. Yet I felt no urge to plant a flag in the living room and claim victory. Instead, I walked the streets around Munjoy Hill, pausing at the waterfront where I had stood with my grandfather as a child. He believed in houses not as trophies, but as anchors, places that kept families and neighbors steady through storms. I thought of Mrs. Penfield watching from her porch, of Tom Keegan nodding at the beams I had repaired. They were part of this story, too. The idea came quietly. I would keep the deed, but not in the way my parents or Rogan imagined. I met with a representative from a local land trust, one that protected homes for working families along the harbor. Within days, we drafted a lease that would place the house in their program, ensuring it stayed affordable and safe. In return, I kept a small upstairs studio for myself, a single room with a window that opened toward Casco Bay. When I signed the lease, relief rushed through me. The house would stand, but it would not be a stage for Rogan's ego or my parents' manipulations. It would serve the community that had always surrounded us, and I could step inside only when I chose. That evening, I unlocked the studio and set my bag on the floor. The rooms below would soon belong to another family, their voices replacing the silence. For the first time in weeks, I breathed without weight on my chest, ready to put the rest into writing. I sat in the upstairs studio with the deed and lease papers stacked neatly beside me. The house below would soon welcome another family, and I wanted to set my own boundaries as clearly as the legal lines now drawn. I opened a blank page in my notebook and began the letter to my parents. I wrote without decoration I would not be their rescuer anymore. I would not cover bills, mortgages, or quiet their mistakes. If they wanted any chance of contact, they would have to commit to counseling not as a punishment, but as a condition of trust. I enclosed copies of the receipts, the court order, and the will. I wanted no debate, only clarity. When I sealed the envelope, I felt no tremor in my hands. It was not anger that guided me, but the need to stop repeating the same cycle. A knock at the door startled me. Mrs. Penfield stood there with a small basket of muffins. She smiled softly, her eyes glistening. "For the woman who kept the porch standing," she said. Her words filled the room with a warmth that paper alone could not carry. Later that evening, Tom Keegan stopped me on the street. He clapped my shoulder, his palm heavy with respect. "Silas would have wanted it this way," he said simply, and I believed him. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from Rogan. It was shorter than I expected, stripped of bravado. He admitted his mistakes, spoke of his fear for the future, and asked for time to make things right. For the first time in years, his words did not demand they requested. I left his message unanswered, the letter to my parents ready for the morning mail, knowing the final step was still ahead. Months later, the sound of new footsteps filled the rooms below. A young family had settled in under the land trust lease, their laughter carrying through the floorboards at night. Toys scattered across the porch where I had once stacked storm shutters, and the sight gave me more peace than emptiness ever had. I kept the small studio upstairs, a single room with wide windows facing Casco Bay. Each morning, I opened the curtains to the light stretching over the water, and I felt the steadiness that had been missing for years. On one wall, I hung the framed deed beside Silas's old repair map of Munjoy Hill, the penciled notes marking the years he replaced shingles after hurricanes and reinforced beams after blizzards. It was less a trophy than a compass, reminding me what stewardship truly meant. The space was simple, a desk, a chair, a bed tucked near the window, but it belonged to no one's expectations but mine. I wrote there often, sometimes code for work, sometimes words that would never be sent. Letters to a past self who thought silence was the only way to keep peace. Downstairs, the family painted walls their own colors, filled the kitchen with smells of stews and bread. I heard it all and smiled, because the house was alive in a way that didn't drain me. It stood, not as a bargaining chip or a weapon, but as a place carrying forward. I no longer needed to prove myself with every nail or dollar spent. My worth wasn't hidden in the floorboards or bargained at a dinner table. It rested in the boundary I had drawn, the life I had chosen, and the door I had learned when to close. I grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut, where the houses were white-columned and lawns were clipped to perfection. Yet, behind the polished doors, the air inside my family's home was never gentle. From as early as I can remember, my place was marked not only by the long walnut table in our dining room, but by the name my parents gave me when they thought I couldn't hear: the dumb one. Every evening, my father sat at the head of the table, posture stiff as if he were still in a boardroom. To his right, my mother arranged herself with her flawless smile, while Sophia always occupied the seat of honor at his left. I was pushed to the very end, so far away that I leaned forward just to catch their words. That arrangement told the story of our family better than any photograph. Sophia in the center, me on the margins. When Sophia came home with her report cards lined with A's, there were toasts and plans for celebrations. When I once placed a certificate from an art contest on the table, my father barely glanced at it before muttering, "At least you stayed in the lines," and the subject shifted instantly back to Sophia's achievements. My mother's voice followed with careful comparisons, always asking why I couldn't be more diligent, more focused, more like her. The laughter that filled the room was never meant for me. Each time I opened my mouth, the moment slipped away. Someone cut me off, or my words were met with silence. Slowly, I stopped trying. Silence became the armor I carried, fragile but necessary. And though I wore it quietly, each layer pressed heavier with the years, until endurance was the only proof I had of belonging. It was Henry, my grandfather in Boston, who first reminded me that silence was not the same as absence. Whenever the walls of our house closed in, I found refuge 2 hours north in Boston, in my grandfather Henry's brick home shaded by lilacs. The scent of the blossoms drifted through his garden each spring, and the quiet there felt like stepping into a different country, one where no one measured me against Sophia. Henry never sat me at the end of a table. He poured me tea in the same chipped porcelain cup he always used and listened without interrupting. He didn't ask about grades or trophies. Instead, in his steady, low voice, he asked questions that unsettled me at first. What do you love? Ilara, how do you want to live at 12? I didn't know how to answer. I shrugged, embarrassed, certain my answers would sound foolish. But when he waited patiently, eyes soft behind his wire-rimmed glasses, I whispered about sketching landscapes in my notebooks, about mixing colors until they matched the way the sky looked before rain. Slowly, the words came more easily. I told him I dreamed of a small gallery someday, a place where people could walk in and feel a little lighter leaving than they did when they entered. Henry smiled as though I'd revealed a great secret. That is who you are, he said. Not the names they give you, not the shadow you've been placed in. Patience, humility, and the way you listen, those are rarer than brilliance. One day, when it matters most, you'll see their worth. I didn't fully understand what he meant then, but as I walked back through the lilac garden, the late sun warming my shoulders, I felt something loosen in me, a quiet certainty that at least one person believed I was more than the label pinned on me. Years later, when Sophia began climbing into black cars with my father for Carter Group board meetings, I held those words close like a hidden compass. By the time I reached my teenage years, the distance between Sophia and me was no longer just measured at the dinner table. It stretched into every part of our lives. On mornings when the sun barely cleared the tree line, a black town car waited at our gate. Sophia, perfectly dressed in pressed suits, slid into the leather seats beside my father, off to Carter Group board meetings where she was introduced as his prodigy. From my attic window, I watched the car roll away, the tires crunching over gravel like a sound meant to remind me I wasn't part of that world. My mornings looked different. I tied on a faded apron at a cafe near the train station, learning the hiss of the espresso machine and the rhythm of customers rushing for their first cup of the day. By afternoons, I stocked shelves at the supermarket, my hands sore from lifting boxes. Each paycheck, no matter how small, I tucked carefully into a savings account. I knew my parents would never pay my tuition the way they promised Sophia, and I refused to give them the satisfaction of watching me beg. One evening at the cafe, a man in a tailored suit snapped at my coworker, a quiet girl named Maribel, because she was slow ringing up his change. Without thinking, I stepped forward, steadying my voice though my pulse raced. "She's doing her best, sir. You'll have your coffee in a moment." He glared, muttered under his breath, but dropped the subject. Maribel's grateful glance was worth more to me than any tip. When my father heard I was working, he laughed. "So serving coffee counts as ambition now?" My mother added softly. "At least Sophia preserves the family's reputation." Their words stung, but I refused to let them erase the pride I carried in earning even a few dollars on my own. In the contrast between Sophia's chauffeured lessons in power and my long shifts behind counters, I began to sense that we were walking two different roads entirely, and those roads grew only further apart when preparations began for her 29th birthday, the year Sophia turned 29. The Whitfield house in Greenwich transformed into something more like a campaign headquarters than a family home. Phones rang constantly. Assistants hurried in and out with binders, and my mother's voice echoed through the halls as she coordinated florists, chefs, and chauffeurs. The gala would be held at the Waldorf Astoria in Manhattan, and my father spoke of it as if it were not simply a birthday, but the crowning of an heir. Sophia was at the center of it all, paraded through fittings on Fifth Avenue where sequined gowns shimmered beneath chandelier lights. Saleswomen cooed over her as though she were royalty, and my mother glowed with pride at every compliment. I waited outside the fitting rooms, arms folded, ignored for hours until my feet ached. When I asked softly, "What about me?" my mother didn't look up from the rack of dresses. "You can wear the blue one from last year. No need to draw attention." "Ilara, Her dismissal landed as smoothly as any polished remark, but it cut all the same. Later that week, she pressed a thick stack of seating charts into my hands. "Don't mess these up. Investors need to sit near board members, and politicians must be placed carefully." I nodded, though she had no intention of hearing my response. My job wasn't to belong at the gala, only to make sure others did. As I flipped through the lists, I saw names I recognized from headlines: senators, media executives, Harvard trustees who once wrote glowing articles about Sophia. Every page confirmed what the night was meant to be: a coronation disguised as a birthday party. In the weeks leading up to it, I moved through the house like part of the decor, invisible except when handed errands. Yet beneath the glittering surface of all that preparation, I felt something shift inside me. The more the event grew into a public declaration of Sophia's supremacy, the more I sensed the ground beneath it was not as solid as they believed. On the morning of the gala, the limousine pulled into our driveway, and for the first time I wondered whether the night ahead would truly unfold the way my parents had planned. The chandeliers of the Waldorf Astoria spilled golden light across the marble floor as though the entire hotel had been polished for Sophia's entrance. Guests in tuxedos and gowns streamed through the ballroom doors, their voices mingling in a chorus of laughter, handshakes, and congratulations. I lingered near the back, clutching a seating chart I'd already checked a dozen times, my faded blue dress tugging uncomfortably at the seams. From where I stood, the whole evening looked like a theater production, each guest playing their part in a story where I didn't exist. Sophia glided through the room with my mother at her side, jewels glittering at her throat, her smile trained and flawless. My father shook hands with senators and executives, his booming laugh echoing above the music. I watched as cameras turned toward them, flashes catching every angle, while I remained in the shadow of the draped curtains. When dinner plates were cleared and the champagne was poured, the master of ceremonies invited my father to the stage. He walked with the confidence of a man certain the world belonged to him, adjusting the microphone as silence fell. His eyes shone with pride as he raised his glass. "Tonight we celebrate not just my daughter Sophia's 29th birthday, but the future of the Whitfield legacy." The applause began even before he listed what that legacy meant. "Sophia will inherit Carter Group, valued at $95 million. She will inherit our Upper East Side mansion, worth $15 million. And, as a token of our pride, she will also take the keys to her brand new Tesla." Each phrase landed like a hammer, sealing my place at the margins. The crowd erupted, glasses clinking, voices lifting in cheers. Sophia stepped forward, bowing her head graciously, basking in the glow as if the lights had been hung only for her. My mother dabbed her eyes with a napkin, overcome with rehearsed emotion. I sat frozen at the back, my hands clenched in my lap. The sound of clapping grew so loud it seemed to swallow the air, drowning out the thud of my own heart. I forced myself to breathe, but the humiliation pressed down like a stone. No one looked my way. No one even seemed to remember I existed. And it was in that suffocating silence that a stranger in a black suit began walking steadily toward me. He stopped in front of my table as if the sea of guests had parted just for him. Tall, broad-shouldered, his face was set in stern lines, unlike the polished smiles around us. Without hesitation, he set a thick white envelope on the tablecloth, leaned closer, and said in a low, steady voice, "It's time." Before I could answer, he straightened and walked away, his footsteps swallowed by the music and laughter. No one else seemed to notice him. My hands trembled as I slid the envelope into my lap, hiding it beneath the folds of my dress. For a moment, I simply stared at it, my breath caught in my chest. The paper felt heavier than it should, as though it carried the weight of something I was not meant to hold. I slipped my finger beneath the flap and tore it open. The faint rip of paper sounded deafening in my ears. Inside was a stack of documents embossed with the Carter Group seal. My eyes skimmed the first page, and the air drained from my lungs. The name printed in bold at the top was not Sophia's. It was mine, Alara Whitfield. I read the words again, certain I was misinterpreting them, but page after page confirmed it transfer of majority ownership. 51% of Carter Group shares, trust accounts in my name, and the deed to the Upper East Side mansion. Each document bore official seals, signatures, and one name scrawled in sharp, deliberate handwriting, Henry Walsh. At the back of the stack was a folded letter. I recognized the handwriting before I unfolded it, the same careful strokes I had once watched glide across his journals in Boston. My eyes blurred as I read Alara. If you are reading this, the time has come. You have lived in shadows, but in silence you have found strength they do not understand, patience, humility, and the courage to listen. These are what will carry this family forward. I place everything I built in your hands. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes. My grandfather had not been blind. He had seen me all along, and as the applause for Sophia thundered around me, I realized the choice pressed itself against my chest: stay hidden with the truth, or stand and claim it. My pulse hammered so violently I thought the entire ballroom might hear it. The envelope weighed in my lap like a stone, but the words of Henry's letter still echoed in my head, steadying me. Before I could lose my nerve, I rose from my chair. The scrape of wood against marble was small, yet in my mind it split the room in two. I walked down the aisle between tables, past startled faces and crystal glasses trembling with light. My father's voice was still carrying across the stage, praising Sophia as the future of the family. When I climbed the steps and placed the folder of documents on the lectern, my hand pressed hard against it as if to anchor me. "This moment belongs to me," I said. My voice shook at first, then steadied as the microphone carried it across the room. The chatter stilled. Forks froze midair. My father's head snapped toward me, his face flushing crimson. "Sit down at once," Richard hissed. "Don't disgrace this family." Evelyn, still smiling for the cameras, whispered through clenched teeth, "Alara, please, don't ruin your sister's day." Sophia laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "You really? What could you possibly have to say?" I lifted the first page high so the blue seal caught the lights. Henry Walsh signed these transfers. Majority ownership of Carter Group, the Upper East Side mansion, the trusts, all in my name. Gasps rippled through the hall. Richard lunged forward, hand outstretched to seize the papers, but I was quicker. I unfolded the letter and began to read, each word steady, as if Henry himself spoke through me. Patience, humility, and the courage to listen. These are the true qualities of a leader. I place everything I built in your hands. The silence that followed cracked when Sophia shrieked, "That's impossible. I'm the one who deserves it." Her voice echoed off the chandeliers, brittle against the weight of Henry's words. And in that moment, the balance in the room shifted, leaving every eye fixed not on Sophia, but on me. The ballroom doors opened, and a hush swept through the crowd. Even before I saw him, I recognized the measured tap of his cane against the marble floor. Henry entered slowly, his shoulders stooped with age, but his presence commanding more silence than my father's speeches ever had. He walked down the center aisle, eyes fixed on me, then climbed the steps with deliberate care until he stood beside me. Richard's jaw tightened. "Father-in-law, tell her this is madness. She's making a spectacle of us." Henry's gaze cut sharply toward him. "I know what I signed, Richard, and I know why." His voice carried across the hall, deep and resonant. "Wealth without compassion corrodes. Talent without humility collapses. You built numbers, but you abandoned people. That is not a legacy, it is a warning." Murmurs rippled through the guests, investors shifting uneasily in their seats. Henry turned to me, his hand settling lightly on my shoulder. "Alara understands patience. She knows how to listen when others would rather shout. She sees what you all refuse to see, that leadership is not measured by applause, but by endurance and quiet strength. That is why I entrusted her with everything. The room tilted. Senators and board members who had been clapping for Sophia moments earlier now leaned forward, studying me with cautious respect. I felt the knot in my chest begin to loosen, as if the years of silence were lifting in pieces. Sophia's face blanched, her lips trembling though no words came. Evelyn's smile had frozen, eyes darting between the guests as though searching for a script. Richard's fists clenched at his sides, powerless against the verdict that had just been spoken. Then the first applause came hesitant at first, then building into a steady rhythm that filled the ballroom like a tide turning. For the first time in my life, I was not invisible. I was seen. And as the sound swelled around me, I understood that the night was not finished, it was only beginning. My father's face burned red as he grabbed his napkin, folded it with sharp precision, and tossed it onto the table. Without a word, he stormed out of the ballroom, my mother trailing after him, her heels striking the floor in clipped staccato. The doors slammed behind them, leaving a faint hush in their wake. Sophia did not follow. She stood near the edge of the stage, her jeweled gown catching fractured light, her expression stripped of its usual composure. For the first time, she looked less like the flawless daughter and more like someone caught without a script. Her voice was unsteady when she finally spoke. All my life they told me who I was, the one to carry everything, the one to shine, and now. Her eyes flickered to the documents still in my hand. If I'm not that, then what am I? I studied her, half expecting another mocking smile, another cutting remark, but none came. She was shaking, and beneath the trembling I saw not arrogance but fear. I could have gloated, could have thrown her cruelty back in her face. Instead, I steadied my voice. You can still be something, but it has to be built on respect, not applause, accountability, not entitlement. If you're willing to do the work, there will be a place for you. The silence between us thickened. Sophia's mouth opened as if to argue, but no words came. Her chin wavered, and for once she had nothing to wield against me. She turned away, her shoulders rigid, and walked slowly toward the far end of the room, leaving the applause behind her. I stood alone at the microphone, the weight of Henry's letter still pressed against my chest, and realized the next step would not be measured in words, but in how I chose to live them. By the time the night ended, the applause had faded into the kind of silence that follows a storm. I left the ballroom not as the girl who had arrived in a faded blue dress, but as someone carrying the weight of a future I had never been meant to hold. The limousine was offered, but I refused. Instead, I took the subway back to Brooklyn, the rattle of the train steadying me more than velvet seats ever could. My apartment was small, tucked on the third floor of a walk-up where the pipes clanged in winter and the paint peeled along the windowsills, but every corner bore the marks of my own labor: the second-hand desk, the chipped mugs I'd brought home from the cafe, the sketches pinned above my bed. For the first time, it felt like enough. I set the envelope on my desk and unfolded Henry's letter once more. His words seemed to glow in the lamplight, sharper now than when I had first read them: patience, humility, and the courage to listen. I slipped the letter into a frame and placed it on the shelf above my sketches, not as a trophy, but as a compass. Then I opened a blank notebook, pen hovering before I began to write. From this day on, I will not live for recognition. I will live to build, to listen, and to remain true. The ink dried fast, and with it, a weight lifted from my chest. I stepped to the window, the city lights stretching wide across the East River, and whispered into the night. Your value does not lie in their labels, and in that quiet moment, I felt the beginning of a life that was finally mine.